Welcome to the Wade Center's podcast.
A podcast of Wheaton College.
How many students of Tolkien's are profoundly grateful that he tutored them, that he taught them, that he gave them information. I know he was called the most boring lecturer, but on the other hand, he had lectures like his performance of Beowulf and things that were electrifying. He put Beowulf into the center of English studies as kind of a root document of our literature. And another marvelous thing, he could be so cranky and crotchety and whatever, but my goodness, his graduate students, the people he worked with, adored him. He was a gentle kindness, a real concern for them. So while he would rather have been in his study writing about elves, the service he gave to those students, as well as the impact on really the study of literature, quite remarkable.
This is Crystal Downing, and today David and I are delighted to be able to talk with someone who is famous among Christians who specialize in theater, Ron Reed. A mesmerizing actor, a brilliant director, and a creative playwright, Ron has written and produced many award-winning productions, including several about Wade authors. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ron.
Oh, it's pretty great to see you, be here.
One of your most recent plays is called Taler's Jack, the story of a friendship. And I noticed as I read it that it was dedicated to your wife, Carol, who first said, that would make a wonderful play. Can you explain her response?
Yeah, well, it was one of these little memorable moments. Often that question is, where does your idea come from? Doesn't lead anywhere. It's sort of like, I don't know. I was interested, whatever. But in this case, it was like the first day of January in 2012. And, kind of Christmas celebrations and family had all kind of settled down. We're sitting at the table. And I was reading a New Yorker article about Tolkien. And I got such a kick out of it. I said, this is really great. It talks about him being the most boring lecturer at Oxford in the most boring subject known to man. And then went on to talk about how at the same time, he was writing The Lord of the Rings, this extraordinary heroic epic, and the sort of dichotomy between those two realities. And so I was telling Carol about that because I got a great kick out of it. And she said, well, he was a great friend of C.S. Lewis, wasn't he? And I said, oh, yeah. And sort of started down that road about their friendship and talked about it a bit. Lewis basically was the cheerleader to get him to actually write The Hobbit. And then through the many years of writing Lord of the Rings, and the fact that Tolkien essentially led Lewis to faith in a significant way. And I kind of went, where would the world be without Lewis being a Christian and Tolkien having written Lord of the Rings? She said, well, that's really great. And I said, yeah, but it's complicated. And then started down the road of, well, Charles Williams, kind of the third wheel, and Lewis, kind of this immense capacity for friendship. Bring more people to the table, more people. Oh, here's my new best friend. Here's my new spiritual Virgil. And here's Tolkien, kind of, he liked these gatherings, but kind of a one-man dog. When he had Lewis, that was golden. And I think he was really unsettled by Williams kind of coming into Tolkien's life. And they became friends too, of course, Williams and Tolkien. But I don't know, you keep picking up all these little notes, comments, remarks, expressions that was a kind of an uneasiness there. So we talked about that and the occult stuff behind Williams and Tolkien's concern about that and what happened with the space trilogy kind of morphing from this is kind of about Tolkien, and then this is kind of Charles Williams by the end, and all the stuff through World War II. Tolkien's kind of trauma from World War I and his son's off at war, while Lewis kind of comes into his own during war. And then Catholicism, versus the kind of mere Christianity, and the divorce thing, and then Roy Campbell coming in, and then the writing, where Lewis kind of just writes book after book after book, and here's Tolkien just
slaving away. Yeah.
What they said about each other, Lewis called Tolkien a genius, but a dilatory, unmethodical man. Whereas Tolkien said of Lewis, he said, he's indefatigable. So they tried to collaborate on a book about language, but it's like the turtle and the rabbit.
Turtle and the hare.
But it's the opposite of the parable, because Lewis would come out with a book a year, and Tolkien would work on the same project,
Yeah.
year after year, decade after decade.
And one of the things I really like about your play, Ron, as you started putting together all this stuff you already knew, you had already had some award-winning productions at Pacific Theatre, which you founded in Vancouver, Canada, and you put up Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, which 2 different seasons, and they both won awards, so congratulations on that. But I know that constructing a play is very different than a scholarly tome that can go into all this great detail, the motivation. How do you externalize the internal, since it's about everything that you put into speech? And I liked how you set up a parallel between Tolkien getting kind of jealous of Lewis's relationship with Charles Williams, but then you also showed Lewis having problems with Tolkien's relationship with Roy Campbell, who was he an Inkling for a while?
No, I think that's one of the most original contributions of your play is bringing Roy Campbell into the picture. Normally, he's a footnote when people talk about the Inklings. He was kind of a wild character, and you do an interesting job, do a fascinating job bringing him into the Inklings dynamic.
Maybe you need to explain who Roy Campbell is, because I hadn't heard of him before I read Ron's play.
Well, I know who Glenn Campbell is. Ron, why don't you do Roy Campbell?
Sure.
You obviously have done more research.
Well, Roy Campbell was known to the Inklings because in the Spanish Civil War, he wrote poetry and an autobiography about his adventures in the Spanish Civil War. And of course, he converted to Catholicism while he was in Spain, which led in right around the time of the Spanish Civil War. Of course, when Franco was pro-Catholic, but a fascist, and the communists were horrifyingly anti-Christian and anti-Catholic, and yet would be painted by many of us in memory as kind of the good guys throwing, because pretty soon you had Franco and then Mussolini and then, that Adolf Hitler guy. So Lewis wrote a blistering pastiche of one of Campbell's poems that essentially was defending Franco. And Lewis attacked that. Lewis just dismissed that as ridiculous. Whereas Tolkien found in Campbell kind of a fellow traveler, a Catholic who had actually literally risked his life to save Catholic artifacts, to literally fight against the communist people and so on. So there was this split on a specific week in their story. Roy Campbell showed up first in the Eagle and Child, and then was invited Thursday night to the Inklings meeting, where Lewis actually was thoughtful enough to literally read aloud his poem that kind of mocked Campbell. And Tolkien's letter about that is the first time you really see his distaste. He starts talking about Lewis as a kind of a Northern Irish Protestant, which very, very loaded. Now that, we're past peace accords and everything, we remember it was a hot item, Ireland's Civil War and independence and all that. So it became a rift and a painful one. And I just discovered in that, though in reality it was condensed into a Tuesday, time at the Bird and Baby and the Thursday night Inklings meeting. But I found it had a really good parallel or an inversion of the story where, of course, Lewis falls in love with Charles Williams in his writing. Tolkien has a skepticism, and it seemed like there was a really nice mirror image, especially since in a way, we identify with Lewis kind of going, come on, here's another guy, bring him to the table. And Tolkien, we're kind of going, well, that's a little petty. Like what are you in grade 4 and a new girl arrived in school and you thought you were BFFs forever and now you're not? But actually, I felt Tolkien's pain in that. And so I really endeavored to show his side of it as well. But our initial feeling is he's being a little childish. And then I hoped to reveal that actually there were reasons for his misgivings that Lewis was kind of tone deaf to. For all that I really admire Lewis's welcoming kind of spirit in his friendship. But then with Roy Campbell, I just described the war hero, the Catholic, hero and so on. Most of that was lies. When you read Campbell's biography as opposed to autobiography, it's like, half the stuff in his autobiography happened to other people and he claims it as his own.
Oh, wow.
So you get these layers of irony that I couldn't explore as much in the play as I wanted, but I make a reference in that kind of climactic scene where Lewis and Tolkien really finally say talk about the cracks that have been emerging during the war in their friendship.
Yeah, it was a great way to show how Lewis intuited this problem with Campbell, just as Tolkien intuited the problem with Charles Williams. So it reinforces that they needed each other because they were able to uncover different truths.
One biographer said that Lewis tended to have one great friend in every decade of his life. And when he was young, it was Warney, and they're playing together in the little end room. His teens, he and Greaves really had a very strong friendship and correspondence. In his 20s, it was Owen Barfield and all the conversations about the Great War and the meaning of imagination. And in his 30s, it was Tolkien, and Tolkien really loved, as you said, that the intimacy. If you look at Tolkien's socializing, it tended to be small groups. He was more introverted, and it was 4 people before the war, the Barovian Society, the TCBS. And I think he liked the Inklings earlier when it was small. If you just look at their letters, Lewis has letters to hundreds of people, whereas Tolkien, it's pretty much the same 12 or 15 people he's writing to. So as the Inklings expanded, I'm sure that Tolkien felt that he was kind of being pushed to the side. I wanted to go back to your comment that Tolkien helped Lewis become a Christian, which really launched his career as a writer. But then Lewis really encouraged Tolkien to publish The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which put him on the map as one of the great 20th century writers. I was making that point in a radio interview once, and I said, if it wasn't for Tolkien, we might never heard of Lewis. And if it wasn't for Lewis, we might never heard of Tolkien. And the interviewer says, yes, and if it wasn't for Lewis and Tolkien, we might never heard of you.
Oh, that's a nice one.
And I go, well, that was uncalled for,
Except if you had thought of it, you would have said it first.
Okay, so in the play, we've already mentioned that you include these characters of Charles Williams and Roy Campbell to create that type of parallelism, but you also include Tolkien's wife Edith and Lewis's brother Warney and Hugo Dyson. So how did you decide who you wanted to put on stage?
Right, well, it's worth saying that the play already was a bit too long when it went on stage. And that is less than half the scenes I wrote for the play. And that's less than half the ones I imagined. I wanted Dorothy Sayers in there.
Yes.
Of course I did. And of course I need to tell you that.
Of course.
But it was just a couple bridges too far.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this kind of panoply of possible characters to draw into the story. And then you begin to go, well, whose story is this? This is sort of a dramatic question when you write a play. I mean, a novel still tends to be about a central character.
Right.
But I don't know. A novel's got so many words, so much scope. People are so patient with it, especially a Dickensian novel or Dostoevsky or something like that.
Right.
Whereas,
in fact, we borrow from theater the term protagonist, which comes from So the agon in ancient Greek theater was the conflict set up, but there's always a protagonist and an antagonist. So yes, this is what you're saying.
When you build a play, just dramaturgical structure, the way these things work, it's not that somebody made a rule and you have to obey it. It's more like a rule of like the law of gravity or something. It's like, if you want your play to work, you can write great plays that don't do this. Just like airplanes can defy gravity, but it takes some work. And so it became essential to say, whose story is this? And initially, I mean, it's interesting that the title you mentioned is the one that Bob Smith came up with. Bob Smith, artistic director down at Lamps Players in San Diego, because he wants to produce a play if this darn pandemic thing ever blows over.
I know.
And that was the title that he kind of thought of. I had suggested Tollers and Jack already, and he thought of the subtitle, and he likes that. When we did it, we called it Tolkien. But that's interesting because my early notes call it the Lewis Tolkien play. And the first summer I researched, I had a glorious summer of just reading and sending emails to David Downing, a personal friend of mine. So I dug in on all that, and I'd played Lewis in 2 plays already. And he was a real mentor for me and from my earliest Christianity. And so as I researched it, this was a play about friendship. I always tell people, how do you know what play to write? You get a few different ideas. Write one that is the closest to your own personal, lifelong core value, what you care about the most. I don't mean your values like I choose these moral positions, but what does your life show over and over that you really care about? And for me, friendship, long friendships. Here's an example of that. You guys became good friends of mine when I was at CalArts and you were in Santa Barbara.
Yes.
But of course, Crystal, you go back with my wife, Carol, to junior high.
Yes.
So
yes.
These long friendships that sometimes weather storms. We haven't had that problem because we haven't lived close enough, but we would have our troubles if we did see each other.
In fact, I was supposed to be in your wedding, and then David went and broke his leg, so I had to cancel being in your wedding. Carol was in our wedding.
See, there's drama for you, see?
Yeah.
Yep.
Now we've got an antagonist. I don't know if it's David or if it's David's leg, but wrecking everything.
But it is true that drama tends to center around conflict. And when you think of Lewis and Tolkien in a play, my immediate thought is externally, they're just these two tweety professors who drink beer and write and give lectures. It's not very promising material for drama. So did you think a lot about how do I make this dramatic as opposed to sort of anecdotal?
Well, yes. And I mean, the idea of drama being conflict, I'd say is a step removed from, I mean, it often shows it that way, itself that way, especially in American screenwriting. But it's actually somebody fighting for something, somebody who needs a thing, trying to get that thing, either for things to be back to the way they were, or that's all I can stand. I can't stand no more. And they set up to change things, to right some wrong, or to make their life or the world better, whatever. So it doesn't have to be conflictual in the sense of two people fighting each other, but it needs to be someone desperately hungry for something, trying to get it. And we may not know immediately what that is, although a good playwright will point us to it right away. And then we see them get closer to that. It's taken away. They have to fight for it. The choices they make it worse, make it better. And then ultimately, the final moments of the play are all bets are off. This is it. Or all the money's on the table, maybe I should say. What's going to happen? And in my case, it was going to be a play about friendship. And so it had to explore all those reversals. The reason, by the way, I told Carol all those things about the complications in the friendship and some more as well. And she said, that would make a great play. And I went, you're right. People usually say that when like some impossible thing that would never happen in the world actually happens. They go, somebody should write a play about that. I'm going, that's the last thing to write a play about. Everybody would go, that never happens. That's not real. But Carol is exactly right. What does make a play is these complexities. So the first summer I identified with Lewis. I'm writing a play about friendship. And I kind of go, well, the antagonist here, the failure, is Tolkien. He's not that good at a friendship over a long period of time. And Lewis seems to have this gift of friendship. And so I kind of went, well, that's not the way you can write a play. I'm an actor. It doesn't matter who you're cast as, what bad guy you might be playing. You cannot sit in judgment of them. You need to live in their life, you need to identify with them and step into that, suspend your judgment. So the next summer that I got to work on the play, I had to tackle that problem of, okay, I got to understand Tolkien. So I said, all right, let's make him the center of the play instead of Lewis, to force my hand. And so it's essential to tell his story from the first scene where we meet him to right through the story. And as I did, I'm frustrated, working away on this thing and kind of going, I don't like that he wrote that and he said that and he seemed to betray this and couldn't forgive that. And then I started going, well, okay, that's the first really nasty thing he wrote. The first thing where I'm really disappointed in him. What was going on then? Well, the way that I do my research is I make a spreadsheet. And every time I find a date that I can pin down, I put it in the spreadsheet chronologically. So they're all sorted. So my spreadsheet for this play has 1,189 lines. That's how many dates are involved. And so I started going through it. I said, when did that episode happen? And I looked through it and I found it. And I went, oh my gosh. I started reading everything I could from the biographies, from the letters, from everything around that time. And it was like, oh my gosh, this was when his doctor had told him, take a sabbatical, take a break, stop working. You're falling apart. And he didn't. And he kept working. That sense of duty that Tolkien had. that sense of responsibility. And I'm going, he's torn apart. You see it in his letters to his son, Christopher. He's torn apart because he wants to live in Middle-earth. He wants to write his book, invent languages and genealogies and histories and make it into this story. What does he do? He has to chair English faculty meetings. He has to correct papers from schoolboys in Australia. He has to fix the drains when his house has a problem. He has to turn his aviary into a chicken coop because of the war. He has to do all-night duty in the bomb shelters. The guy has so much he's called on to do. And what he's made for is to write, imagine a universe and write. And honestly, that penny dropped. I was working out on my back deck. I walked in, Carol was in the kitchen, and I went, Carol, I thought I was C.S. Lewis. I'm Tolkien. Because that's been the story of my life. I set out to be an actor and then a playwright and a director. And I ended up running a theater company. And I have whined for 36 years about the fact that I act in one play a year. The rest of the time I'm fundraising. I'm having staff meetings. I'm talking to the board. I'm planning this and strategic planning that. And most of my fellow artistic directors get as much joy out of creating a theater company as they do out of creating theater. And for me, I'm sorry, I just want to live in the world of the play I'm acting in.
Does this mean you found out you're less likable than you thought you were?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. You joke about that, but that's been my grief. When I'm rehearsing a play, I'm pretty good to be around. A little intense maybe, but so is everybody working on the show. I love it when I just walk around whistling and happy. Except the day when it's going badly, but that's for a day. When I'm caught in the middle of not doing what I feel I'm craving to do, I'm not so likable. I don't like me. And then because relationships, friendships are the most important thing, as I said earlier, the level of discontent with my own self. And so suddenly I go, oh my goodness, I am Tolkien. And then I can write the play. So then I began going, okay, this poor man, he loves friendship. You look at the Tea Club and Moravian Society, right?
Right.
You go, he kept putting these little groups together, this Icelandic reading group. Oh yeah, that'd be a big hit.
Yeah, right.
And he keeps doing this thing. And then he finds Lewis. So and not only did he have the TCBS, but they died in the war. They were killed, all but one. And so I just felt this loneliness. And then he meets Lewis, who loves his writing, who loves his ideas, instead of this little secret that he hides away. Somebody's going, more. Tell me more. Let's stay up till 2 a.m. Tell me about elves. What is this? And they go on and this friendship grows. And then the conflict. So Act 1, in dramatic structure, they say Act 1, get your character up in a tree. Act 2, throw rocks at him. Act 3, get him down out of the tree. And obviously he can fall out of the tree or he can heroically climb out of the tree having saved the cat. It doesn't matter. But that's your 3-act structure. So for me, get the friendship up the tree is establish this friendship through those 2 things. And then Act 2, the long act, is everything that happened during the war, from Charles Williams to Roy Campbell to everything else that destabilizes, that throws rocks at the friendship. And then the final act is when the war's over and things get said and it breaks.
I wanted to go back to your comment about him wanting to live in the world of Middle-earth, or the world of his creation and having to do all these things. He himself was very aware of that syndrome. His story, Leaf by Nibble, is a perfect allegory of his own life. He just wants to paint this tree and have this perfect leaf. And this friend named Parish, which I think is a great name for the parish, the community, can you help me with this? Can you do this? And it's a perfect expression of his psychological dilemma that you described a minute ago. And I'm fascinated that he was as aware of it as you are aware of it in your own personality.
And let me add to the fact that your frustration about ending up directing a theater company has added to your reputation, because Pacific Theater is very well regarded, well known. Your productions have been nominated for at least 180 awards from the Jesse Richardson Theater Awards Society. So you've done a fantastic job, but it wasn't what you had originally set out to do. That's really interesting.
How many students of Tolkien's are profoundly grateful that he tutored them, that he taught them, that he gave them
Right.
I know he was called the most boring lecturer, but on the other hand, he had lectures like his performance of Beowulf and things that were electrifying. He put Beowulf into the center of English studies as kind of a root document of our literature. And another marvelous thing, he could be so cranky and crotchety and whatever, but my goodness, his graduate students, the people he worked with, adored him. There was a gentle kindness, a real concern for you. So while he would rather have been in his study writing about elves, the service he gave to those students, as well as the impact on really the study of literature, quite remarkable. So yeah, there's what we would prefer to do. That's part of what God calls us to. And there's the part that is the take up your cross and follow me that we might prefer not to do. And somehow the two of them are not in everyone. Some people's profound calling and joy is that service.
Although Tolkien had a side that he sort of liked college politics in a way. Lewis called him Lord of the Strings because he liked the wire pulling and let's get our guy into this position. And he tried to get Lewis a position, as you know, but Lewis was too unpopular. It is interesting that as a lecturer, Lewis was famous and packed the place out even to the windowsills, whereas Tolkien was hard to understand, as you show in the first scene of your play. But as tutors, Tolkien was almost universally liked, as you just said, whereas a lot of people felt they were being bullied by Lewis. He tried to treat them the way Kirkpatrick treated him, and he liked that thrust and parry and, go ahead and defend your position. Whereas a lot of his pupils kind of wilted under that sort of approach to pedagogy, so he actually had mixed reviews as a tutor.
Well, and indeed, I mean, maybe that's why he thrived at the Inklings, because he was among people that would give him a fight, whether it's Dyson, who's just up for a fight and a joke, or his intellectual equals. But by and large, he's got little undergraduate students that come in with C.S. Lewis. And I know that we kind of over-revere him, perhaps, because we're all, sort of devotees. But my goodness, the man remembered everything he ever read. He was a remarkable scholar, constantly reading and thinking. And can you imagine, you're 18 years old, you come into a class with him, and he challenges your paper and pins you to the wall? Well, of course he could. And you're right, it was Kirkpatrick. It was this. What was the story, David? He gets off the train with Kirkpatrick when he first meets him as a young.
Right. Yeah, he first meets him and he says something like, "Oh, Hertfordshire is greener than I expected." And Kirkpatrick goes, "Why did you have any expectation? Did you look at maps? How did you know it was green? What did you think the rainfall was?" And Lewis goes, "I'm just trying to make a little polite conversation here." And he learned right away that everything was going to turn into an interrogation. But he liked that. He said it was meat and strong beer. Because even as a teenager, he was up for that kind of treatment. It really pushed him to new intellectual heights.
And that's something you captured in your play, Ron, this fight back element in Lewis's character.
Well, there's characters that refer to him as being a bit of a bully. And Tolkien begins to play that note as the play goes on. You're a bit of a bully, Jack. And that was tricky to find an occasion to show Lewis being. Again, you've only got 2 hours and a bit of story, but I felt like the Roy Campbell incident was a really good case in point, where he really was bullying. But that was a little hard to build in. But I'll tell you a little thing. As I wrote the play and wrote scene after scene and all these other whole subplot about Charles Williams and Lalage, that story, I thought that would really show the irony of Lewis's embrace of this guy and Tolkien's suspicion. But that didn't fit in the play either. It was one of the last things to be cut. But my point is...
Explain to our listeners who Lalage is. A lot of our listeners may not recognize your allusion.
Yeah. Charles Williams, had been involved with sort of cult-like things and then cults, and then became more and more an Orthodox Christian, a Christian. But even so, still had a little secret society. And then he had some relations with women that are especially problematic now. Yeah, they're just hard to deal. Little secret dalliances with people and so on. And one of them was a young woman. And he would give people names. He'd impose his names, his fictional names on them and put him into, this is Williams, and put them into his kind of fantasy, sort of Arthurian legend and so on. And so he met this young woman who was thrilled with him, and he called her Lalage. He gave her a name and gave her assignments and sort of disciplines and things like that. And that was literally going on while he was in Oxford, while he was being one of the Inklings and presenting himself so positively to Lewis and Tolkien, which is to say that positive side of Williams is real, but so was this other really troubling side.
Well, Eliot said he was almost like an angel or a saint, and W.H. Auden used similar terminology. So his public persona, and I don't think it was hypocrisy, I think it was all tied in together. I should mention these weren't physical affairs with women. It was more emotional affairs or emotional dominance. He seemed to seek a kind of emotional closeness and what's the word I'm looking for?
Intimacy.
Intimacy with women other than his wife. And it was certainly unhealthy, but I did want to make the point that he wasn't having physical affairs with these women.
No, that's an important point to make. But they certainly are creepy as heck. And when
Yeah.
when I did write the final scene where, if you read Letters to Lalage, certainly you get the sense. And I actually wrote a couple of those scenes in the play. And it was sort of like, I can't put them in there. But I don't mean to demean him. I mean, the books are there, but that wasn't known to either Lewis or Tolkien. It's just as you said, Crystal, kind of an overtone, an intuition, and proved to be some truth to it. Where did we go?
Well, at one point, Tolkien called him a witch doctor, and they had another meeting where I think it was Wren, another Inkling, who said, when I listen to Charles Williams, I can see why they used to burn people at the stake.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, there were definitely mixed reviews of Williams' addition to the Inklings.
One of the books he wrote that came out when he was there was Witchcraft. And again, it's not sort of saying we should all be witches. On the other hand, he's really into sort of alchemy. And it's all kind of off. But the bigger point I'm making, or maybe it's the smaller point, but in terms of the crafting of the play, so much was written and discovered that wouldn't fit into a play. And part of that's what makes a play good, if you can just trim it down to essentials that follow a storyline and really show us Tolkien and Lewis and as much of their hearts as you can show. But I always thought this would make a really good miniseries. Like if I could have 12 episodes, we could bring in Dorothy Sayers and the plays at the Canterbury Festival. And we can bring in Dorothy Sayers, but Charles Williams and that, but also the Lalage story and all the things. It could be really great. But I went, as soon as it's a miniseries, someone else is writing it. So I'll keep that to myself. But I
would like to bring in Mrs. Moore. I'd like to bring in Janie Moore. Lewis writes books where he says, biblically, it's very important for the man to be the head of the household. And that's the traditional roles that we all need to understand. Then he goes home and Janie Moore says, "Oh, Jack, could you bring me my water bottle? I'm not feeling well. Oh, Jack, could you do the vegetables? Jack, you need to fire this housemaid for me. She's really..." And I think there's something funny about someone who's got this blueprint for how gender relationships would work, but both with Mrs. Moore and with Joy Davidman, he tended to enjoy being bossed around. He actually said that once in a letter. He and his brother were on a walking tour, and they were so mud spattered and they looked like a couple of hobos. And a woman said, "If you all go around to the back door, I'll feed you." And he very meekly went around to the back door and he said, "I don't know what it is, but I like being bossed around by women." So yes, that's definitely an element of his personality that's paradoxical.
Well, and again, the Mrs. Moore became such a toxic person for Warnie and Jack. And when she finally dies, Warnie writes in his journal that he's just had the happiest year of his life.
Right.
And he's not being mean. There's not a mean bone in his body, but it's just like, oh my goodness, something clouded. So anyway, I told you about my tensions between running a theater company, being an artist. I mean, in 1980, I decided to run away and join the circus, be an actor. And then I ended up running a circus. So I'm retiring in a few months from running Pacific Theater, from being the artistic director. In fact, I'm now actually the artistic director emeritus, and Caitlin Williams has been appointed our artistic director. So she's already taking those things over, and we're just having a few months of overlap. But the point being, I'm not retiring from being a theater artist. To my mind, I ran away to join the circus. I ended up running the circus, and now somebody else can look after the box office and booking us into fields in the towns and fixing the trucks when they break down and the lion's sick. What are we going to do about that? I'm going to get back on the trapeze. I'm going to be in plays. It's not my choice anymore. I don't get to decide, but what I can decide is what I can write. So yes, I hope to act and direct some more, but I'm going to write. And after I take a little while and follow my wife's fine example of actually retiring and actually reading the books she wanted to read and actually being with people and not in a rush. After I've lived that, as soon as I get a little antsy, I intend to turn my Tolkien play into a novel.
I know that you were supposed to perform the Tolkien play in Minneapolis this May, but COVID shut things down. Were you going to play the lead role of Tolkien in the Minneapolis production?
No, Bob Smith wanted me to play the role at Lamb's Players basically a year from now when they did it there. But no, the Minneapolis production at Open Windows Theater, they were going to fly me down to see it though. And then not long before it would have gone into rehearsal, the theater shut down. So they have scheduled it for a year later. They've scheduled it for this coming spring.
Okay.
The chance that they can do it, I think, is still minimal. I've known Bob since before I started my theater, when I was at Cal Arts and we got to know one another. I would drive down and see plays at Lamb's Players in San Diego. And that's really where the vision for my theater was born. A company of faith that was not propagandistic.
Right. In fact, here's the greatest compliment I can give you is Dorothy Sayers would adore you.
Wow, that's great. She was a babe.
Yeah. Okay. She loved theater her whole life. In her letters, there were some days when she would finish her exams or finish a writing project, when her exams at Oxford or a writing project, she would treat herself to 3 performances, theater performances a day. She would go. I don't know how you could do that. But she had this famous line that I think describes you. She said, "The only Christian work is good work well done." And she had a real problem with theater troupes, film companies that would write and perform things with the goal of evangelizing people. And she felt that just pushes people away from Christ if you have shoddy workmanship. And I know this has been one of your goals in Pacific Theater, is just to put on good theater. And so the plays aren't always Christian plays, but then you intersperse something like Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, or you have a play about George MacDonald, and maybe someday we'll have a chance to talk about that. So congratulations on good work well done.
I'll take that from you and from Dorothy L. Sayers. I'll let you be her spokeswoman here. Thank you.
Okay, good.
My quotation, someone said of Lord Byron that he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. It reminded me of you, Ron. I just thought, yeah, that's like our friend Ron.
Wow, that is a banner to enter into my retirement under.
I have to give you one line that I really, there were so many lines that.
Such a witty script.
Yes. But one of my favorites, and I marked here about 8 different passages, but we don't have time to go over all of those. But at one point you have Tolkien looking at a tree. And so there's kind of a leaf and tree motif in your play that ties things together. I really liked that. And of course, David brought up Leaf by Nibble. And so I don't know if you
Which,
were
by the way,
of that
was a scene in the play at one point. Warnie came and Tolkien was complaining about all these things he had to do, but he was standing just staring at a tree. And Warnie comes in and they talk for a bit, and he starts talking about Leaf by Nibble, which he's writing then, and he talks about all this, and Warnie says, but you don't like allegory though, something like that. It's kind of caught him out. But back to you, Krista. What?
So Tolkien's outside looking at a tree, and he says, "They also serve who only stand and stare at trees." And what made me laugh is that's from one of my favorite lines from one of my favorite sonnets by John Milton. They also serve who only stand and wait, which is applicable to Tolkien. He just waited and waited and revised before Hobbit and Lord of the Rings came out. But, adding that little coda, they also serve who only stand and stare at trees. It just brought such delight to me. So
and it got a good laugh every night too.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ron. This has been really wonderful. And once again, we hope we can do it again and talk about George MacDonald.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a joy to remember the play and talk about these mutual friends of ours. Thanks,
Yes,
Sullivan. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Ron.
Bye-bye.
The Wade Center podcast is a production of the Marion E. Wade Center at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. Our hosts are the co-directors of the Wade Center, Drs. Crystal and David C. Downing. Our episodes are produced and edited by Aaron M. Hill. If you enjoy the podcast and the content we offer, please leave us a review on iTunes, tell your friends, and consider making a donation to the Wade. The Wade Center is entirely self-funded. Financial gifts help support the expert services, vast collections, and varied programming we offer at no cost. If you have questions about the podcast or suggestions for future episodes, please email us at wade@wheaton.edu or contact us via Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. To learn more about the Wade Center, our 7 British Christian authors, what we offer, and how to make a donation, visit our website at wheaton.edu/Wade.